Yo, what's up? It's someone that's someone, and welcome back to another topic video. Today we have a pretty interesting one as we're diving into substance-induced derealization. Derealization can be a common side effect for some to go through with substances. Some may be prone to it through various conditions such as epilepsy, PTSD, sleep disorders, other mental disorders like bipolar, schizophrenia, and much more. But specifically, we're looking at how it can be brought on through substance use, where we'll take a look at both acute and long-term derealization. Just about any kind of substance use can influence it, but some do more so in a more unique and varied way. When you have an experience when you feel like you're losing yourself from your normal reality, it's much easier to see how this can be influenced. I myself have experienced it in different ways from substance use, and I'm sure a lot of you out there have also. So we're going to break down derealization and get into how each class of substances can influence it. So I'm sure you'll enjoy this. Without further ado, let's dive right into this. Definition. So let's try and start with a base definition. When it comes to defining derealization, it's typically defined as feeling detached from the rest of the world. It's a dissociative state of being where you end up feeling that things are unreal, that the world you're living in might feel fake, or that you have no real connection in being where you are. You can feel like you're living in a dream. Many describe it as if there's a fake layer lying between you and the world, like you're in some sort of fog, for example. Another common analogy is that you can feel like you're viewing things through a lens or a screen, like you're watching a movie, for example. Basically, it's where you lose your sense that the external environment is genuinely real. And this can be a really odd feeling. It can make you feel really out of place and alien. You can also experience emotional dampening and or déjà vu. Other effects like impairments, stress, anxiety, paranoia, or a panic attack may come up and result, or vice versa. A panic attack or something similar could induce derealization. And the same can be said of drug abuse. Not any substance in particular, but subjecting your body and mind to depending on certain qualities about a substance can bring derealization on itself. And it can also come on naturally for some with no clear big influencers involved. Depersonalization. So I wanted a section for depersonalization just to briefly clarify some things. Now, depersonalization and derealization are often talked about together, and that's because they can often coincide with each other. But depersonalization is detachment from the self, what's internal, rather than what's external. You can feel like you really don't know who you are, that you're kind of on autopilot, that you just kind of go along with things, and all that you experience isn't necessarily you. For example, feeling like your thoughts aren't yours. But we aren't heavily focusing on this aspect for today's video. While the two can go hand in hand in cases, that doesn't mean they will 100% of the time. They could each manifest on their own without the other being present. But I just wanted to make that clear. This video is focused on derealization, how substances can create feelings of being detached from your environment, not necessarily yourself. Being in an altered state. So before we get into any substance, I just want to know how simply being in an altered state could potentially cause feelings of derealization. And by altered state, I just don't mean induced by substance, but for example, those who've gone through a period of stress, such as losing a loved one or having near-death experiences. Such events can be drastically life-changing, and in result, they can influence you to feel like things aren't as real as they seem. And I think when there's a drastic alteration in your perception of life, especially one you aren't prepared for or can predict, this can cause some kind of detachment to occur to what you think reality is. But a big reason I want to bring this stuff up is because this could be potentially applicable for just about any substance and experience. It's a big reason why newbies may be prone to experiencing derealization with a substance. But now let's get into how each class of substances can influence derealization. Cannabinoids. Okay, so cannabis and other cannabinoids. This is actually one of the most common substances I think people can experience long-term derealization from. I personally have myself. For me, it was actually more so influenced by my first acid trip when I experienced it heavy in combination with cannabis, which will bring up psychedelics next. But the state itself can influence people to think that the way things aren't real, I think in general, cannabis can cause feelings of derealization itself, but I feel the more you smoke, the less these feelings will be apparent. Over time, that is. But I'll say even with a tolerance, when it comes to new strains, new batches with different terps, the feelings can be stronger than usual. And when it comes to newbies and those not used to it, things can be much more prominent for many reasons. Cannabis can do a good job at breaking down or altering your normal perception, just inducing something different to the point where it feels alien to some. This can throw a lot of people off and as a result, throw off what they believe about reality. Often this is the state people end up in where they may think they're dying or that the weed was laced. And other coinciding effects can influence this further. For example, the dry mouth. The increased heart rate and whatnot can throw people off to the point where they misinterpret the danger. This can influence anxiety pretty easily, which may already be an effect brought on alone, possibly furthering the feelings of derealization. But outside of having little experience with cannabis, it can potentially influence derealization for those at risk. For example, if you already have anxiety issues or something similar, it could worsen them and derealization may be a symptom. Potentially, it can be other stressors or some kind of mental condition. Or maybe it can be brought up from prior trauma or a psychedelic experience. Cannabis can be one of the stronger ones to cause this. For many, it can be just one-time smoking and they can feel as if life is thrown off for them for the next 2 weeks, or maybe the next month, for some longer, even more months. Some claim years. If you saw my story with it after my 1PLSD trip, I personally feel like it would have lasted me a couple weeks. It was apparent going throughout my day. I was able to function just fine, but it did throw me off in ways. I was influenced by my boy Evan though to keep smoking, which the second day, I was a mess of anxiety during the high. I felt like nothing was real and I had depersonalization to go with. But by the third, fourth day, I was feeling back to normal, which the normal for me was to get high on cannabis. Thanks to Evan, of course. Psychedelics. But that brings us to the next class of substances, and that's psychedelics. I feel like derealization found with psychedelics can be similar to cannabis, but not always. I'd say cannabis oftentimes has a much more direct feel to it and impact. While with psychs, it can be like that, but it can also be reactionary based off the things that are going on within your trip and possibly more. At the same time with psychedelics, I feel like during the experience, the opposite can be just as true. That is, feeling what you're experiencing is even more real than the life you live out every day. Which in a sense, that might indirectly influence derealization outside of your trip. It can be really situational how you may feel, depending on what scenario is unfolding. But the derealization can also come after the fact, which I do feel tends to be most common for people, but not always. At least that's when it can hit the most, because that's when people are looking to return to baseline reality. It's that now things don't feel normal or real in cases. But let me try to explain how some situations and thought flows might unfold, which may bring out derealization and result. I feel like how psychedelics inspired deep thought flows plays a huge role into this. Also if you've been experiencing something like anxiety or depression before or during your experience. But typically, many people can get philosophical and creative off of psychedelics. And we bring to question the nature of our reality. And you can have many viewpoints on this, that things are incredible, maybe things aren't that great, or you may feel that everything's ridiculous and things are kinda goofy, or maybe something totally different. I think many of us would agree that in this age, there's a lot of silly things going around though, some very outrageous and unbelievable behavior. And that could cause you to question if we're living in a matrix or something like that. And you start to think more and more about how things work. And what if things were really like that? And how it actually might work out. And especially with how psychedelics can change your perspective, both during and afterwards, this can feel all the more convincing. You realize that this reality, the one you're perceiving, is simply an image produced by our brains best fit for the human experience. For example, we can't see all the colors of light, or we can't see things like microwaves or x-rays, or things beyond this reality like a higher dimension. You just start to see how limited our perception can be, and naturally you begin to question how true everything is, and how much of things are created by your mind. Then we can get into other theories like how this reality might be a simulation, and how the whole technology and computers themselves are essentially in the alpha stage for creating even more realities. And essentially, if we're just living in a computer system, what does it even mean to be alive? Or another common one is, what if this is a dream? Or what if we're in a hospital living with a coma or something like that? And thinking and going all through this stuff for the first time, especially if you're tripping, it can be anxiety inducing. There can be a lot of existential angst. I feel like these can be the types of things that some people think about that will cause them to have a panic attack. Again, especially when tripping, some people just can't help but feel scared and helpless. And if you have a traumatic experience while tripping that's filled with derealization, it most likely will stick with you for a bit. And you could potentially call it a mental risk when it comes to taking a psychedelic. It can really shake some people up hard, like nothing else they've ever experienced. And like cannabis, it will most likely take a good amount of time before things start to feel baseline again. And speaking of cannabis, smoking after a traumatic psychedelic experience most likely can bring those feelings of derealization back, and just prolong the time that things feel normal again. Or you may just end up like me and end up being forced to smoke by your friends and get over it the hard way. Either way, psychedelic derealization can be one of the most mindfucky and intense types of derealization you can ever experience. Dissociatives. Okay, for dissociative substances, it's kind of an odd one. Derealization and depersonalization can be a common effect of a dissociative experience. They act by antagonizing NMDA receptors, which in result actively cause dissociation, a common symptom to experience when undergoing derealization. Thus, the two can really go hand in hand in some cases. But the difference with dissociatives, there typically is an elimination of anxiety and sometimes stress, to the point that that weird feeling may not be so impactful and difficult to take in. At least concerning single usage, most probably won't have any long-lasting effects to where it feels like genuine natural derealization. This seems to be especially true with something like ketamine, with some claims that therapy sessions could even possibly help reverse the effects of derealization. Which, with how relaxing ketamine could be, I really do feel like the reduction in anxiety could make it easier to take everything in better and accept it. But in terms of abuse, this is where it's most likely to become an issue. Being in that state too much will make it more likely to develop long-lasting feelings, which withdrawal states won't make this easier. Or if we bring out the dissociative DXM, this one could be potentially more risky, seeing how it involves serotonin and other systems. But for the most part, many people report single usage often will not leave permanent effects, just more temporary ones. I would even say that these parts of the experience can be very enjoyable and appealing at times, and it makes dissociatives part of what they are. Deliriance. Okay, so the derealization with deliriance isn't necessarily focused on specifically, but it can be an effect with them during the experience and easily afterwards. A big part of this is probably based on how unreal the experience can seem at times, with hallucinations like shadow people, fake cigarettes, insects, and who knows whatever else horror. And with how convincing these hallucinations can seem at times, it isn't surprising to see derealization pop up because you literally can't tell what's real or not in your perceived reality. But I do suspect that a strong delirium dose can bring feelings of derealization on naturally without the conscious input of the hallucinations. Reports do vary, but many do describe ending up in a somewhat dreamlike state, though this can have the opposite effect at times, as you can become convinced everything going on is actually real. Basically though, it won't be consistent like that since the delirium experience can vary so much, but definitely a possibility. I think users find it more often as an after effect, whether that be acute or prolonged. HPPD is also a possibility, especially when it comes to abuse. It's more of a side effect depending on how your experience unfolds, though it can be an effect itself, especially with the right amount. Depressants. So with depressants inducing derealization, it's a bit different. For the most part, many won't experience derealization during the intoxication, but more so afterwards. Though it can be possible to feel some slight derealization during the experience depending on the substance and how much is used. Dissociation can sometimes be a side effect of depressants, though it isn't always consistent. But where consistency with derealization may develop is with the withdrawal depressants. Typically we see this mainly with anti-anxiety medications and alcohol, though opioids and others can easily be subject to these effects. But when significant withdrawal takes place, it can actually induce feelings of depersonalization and derealization. Many describe it as if they're in a brain fog and that nothing actually seems real because of it. It's thought that depersonalization does take a stronger role here though, since the inhibition of anxiety is no longer present. That can really mess with someone's personal identity of who they believe they are naturally. But combine this with feelings of unease and possible paranoia, and you can easily see how someone may get feelings of derealization along with. Again, dosage and severity is going to play a huge factor here, but it's definitely a possibility. Another example can be with benzos and blacking out. When you have it often enough, it can mimic dissociative amnesia. So lots of possibilities here. Antidepressants. Okay, with antidepressants, this is sort of a special category I had to include. It's not necessarily that common, but I think it's somewhat of a known thing that it can happen to some. And there isn't too much research concerning this specifically, especially depending on the type of antidepressant, so it's mostly just anecdotes. Some claim that antidepressants can bring derealization out and cause it. Some claim that it mainly happens in the withdrawal, then some say it can worsen it if you haven't already. And there's a lot of theories as to why this takes place, which I do feel like the state of mind and just who you are honestly may be playing a big role, and just how you think and what you're exposed to. But something direct that can be experienced is having a more foggy viewpoint or a sort of tunnel vision, giving that feeling of being in a dream state more. Some state that antidepressants can cause a feeling of disconnection from certain aspects in life, that it can cause them to be less critical, or just really alter your viewpoint in this weird way, possibly bringing on those feelings of derealization. Some claim that they feel hollow inside, or even like a zombie. Some claim it can make them feel like they're about to die, or like they're about to lose their minds. There's a lot of possible disconnections from reality antidepressants seem to influence for some, which physically, this can be explained by the brain taking the time to make the adjustment to the antidepressant, or getting off one. For example, with SSRIs, the introduction of all the serotonin could cause these feelings. Typically, it can take a few weeks or more for the body to take in these adjustments. But derealization can be tricky for some, and with antidepressants, it especially helps to talk with your doctor. It could be you need a different antidepressant, a different dosage, more therapy sessions, or so on. Stimulants. Okay, so this may be the one class where it could potentially help with feelings of derealization. There's some studies suggesting that stimulants and the wakefulness they can bring on can help diminish feelings of dissociation and thus depersonalization and or derealization. For the most part, it seems as if stimulants are highly unlikely to induce dissociation unless we're talking about the withdrawal. In a similar way like alcohol, stimulants can have the ability to diminish certain feelings that help enable you to act more in certain situations. When someone stops stimulant usage and those feelings aren't present anymore, it can throw someone off, especially when feelings of anxiety and paranoia are present. If it's a full-blown stim psychosis, you can most definitely see how derealization can be a side effect, which when users binge and whatnot, they can often stay up for days at a time. This can set in stone feelings of derealization a lot easier. Stimulant withdrawal is also known to cause dysphoria, panic, delusions, and more, which can influence derealization. But derealization itself isn't necessarily a definite effect with withdrawals. Each case can vary. But in a similar way to depressants, when there's dependency formed, derealization can be a natural side effect. Miscellaneous. Okay, and for this last section, I just wanted to bring up a few specific examples where derealization might occur elsewhere. The main big one I want to mention that could have probably been grouped with psychedelics is salvia divinorum. Salvia sticks out though because I do have to know, just based on the experience itself, I feel like it's probably 5 to 10 times as likely to cause feelings of derealization compared to psychedelics. Which, if you haven't heard of a salvia trip report, just go dive into some and you'll see what I mean. The level of dissociation and wacky vibes it puts you into seems unmatched. It can literally tear you away from everything you know about yourself and your existence. And you get put into an existence that just feels wrong. Common examples include feeling like you turn into your fridge, or you turn into a conveyor belt, or like a lamp, or just some inanimate object that really has no place containing human consciousness. And often you won't realize what's going on, other than it feels messed up and that you shouldn't be experiencing it. It can be heavy, especially with how you can convince yourself that that reality feels more real than your normal human perception. Which I have to admit myself, the days after I had a salvia trip, natural feelings of derealization emerged afterwards. Even during the trip, you can say the feelings were present. But trying to get back on with normal life is just so damn strange after salvia. And you can also group a few others with this that are known to be outside the psychedelic realm, such as something like Amanita muscaria, a notably poisonous mushroom that can bring on a unique psychedelic dissociative experience, and derealization can easily be in effect. And there's a few others like this. Then some nootropics and herbs can be abused, which can induce dependency and withdrawal. And as mentioned previously, some withdrawal states can be enough to bring on feelings of derealization, most often due to the unease brought on. Some examples include something like modafinil, a nootropic which can bring on wakefulness for long periods, or something like kratom, a natural plant with opioid-like effects. Both of these when abused can cause strong withdrawal states, and can bring on feelings of anxiety and paranoia, influencers of derealization. Alright, so we're going to end things there for today. I feel like we did a good job of covering each class and how each can bring on derealization, or in some cases, help mitigate it. I feel like a big part of whether derealization is going to occur or not has to do a lot with dosage, frequency, and setting. The substance too, of course, is going to play a huge role, some a lot more than others. And I think this is a pretty important subject to be aware of for just about any user. It's something I wish I had known before actually going through it myself. But in general, as long as you're careful and responsible with your usage, and make sure you don't keep using if you feel like there's an issue mentally that arises, I think derealization can be avoided. But sometimes it is inevitable. And with some of these states, it's going to be natural because of how different they can make you feel. I think a big part of what you need to do if it happens though is understand that you're okay, that you're not dying. And though it may not be very pleasing, it isn't the end of the world and it'll pass with time. It is easier said than done, but try to breathe. Find things to relax you, and just know everything will be alright. But drop a comment if you have any experience with substance-induced derealization, and what you did to help get over it. It can be a super discomforting state at times, but I think better understanding it and taking things easier on yourself can be a great start to help yourself, and to help better prevent it as well. So if you enjoy this, let me know down below and what you want to see next. I'd be happy to cover depersonalization in a similar format. But make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't. Check out the Patreon, the socials, memberships, and more in the description. It's been someone that's no one, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.